we're standing in the doorway of the daycare talking with the woman who runs it, and you can just smell the marijuana from the illegal grow across the street drifting across. And it's a residential neighborhood. It's illegal. It's a commercial scale grow. And once a month, a van with Massachusetts license plate shows up, and two young guys hop out, make a load, and drive away. So it's very obvious what's happening there if you understand some of the details of how marijuana is grown.
Hey, folks. The Chinese Communist Party, U.S. weed farms are a threat to the United States of America. Yes, this is what's so fascinating about this story. Before COVID, I had been tipped off about what was going on in California's Antelope Valley through Congressman Mike Garcia. We've had him on the show. We've talked about that here, about the CCP and other transnational criminal organizations operating in the United States, purchasing land, utilizing that land and the money being made from that land for their own nefarious purposes. And at the time, it was so difficult to get people to believe what was really happening. Even the Congressman Garcia was like, I can't get people to understand that this is really happening in the United States. And what I mean is hundreds of thousands of acres of land across the United States, some of which was being used, this is crazy, to basically grow marijuana for criminal organizations or for governments. Like the CCP was involved in some of this land purchase, or there would be people that would look like they were legally buying the land for stuff, but then the land that they said they were using for growing marijuana would be dry, arid land, like what happened in Oklahoma and Governor Stitt was looking at, and that had no water rights. So why were companies connected to the CCP purchasing this land? How are they not being busted by the FBI, by local law enforcement? How are they growing marijuana in communities? Well, on today's show, I have a journalist who has been on the ground investigating, not just the surface investigation, folks, not just exposing what is happening, but this journalist, Steve Robinson, has taken a deep dive along with Jenny Terre. Remember, Jenny Terre worked with me. Jenny Terre is now at the Daily Caller. She is part of this investigation. They are taking a deep dive into what is going on in the state of Maine and how the land purchase in the state of Maine, how these criminal organizations and the Chinese government are utilizing this land for purposes far exceeding what they are saying on paper. Far exceeding what they are saying on paper. So if some of that land is being purchased by the Chinese triads or people connected to the Chinese Communist Party, and they're even saying on paper that it's being used for marijuana grows, that may be only a part of the story. That's how deep this goes. That is how frightening this is. And by the way, there are banks, there are people, there are real estate agents, there are plumbers and electricians and people benefiting from this money, literally taking money out of the hands of our enemies, because no one is doing a thing about it, not even the FBI. Even if there is an investigation ongoing right now and they tell you that, or they don't tell you that because they won't even tell you if that's happening. These have been going on for years. Some of these grows have gone back to 2019. That is how long this has been going on. And no one, my friends, has really been busted. But before we get to Steve Robinson, I want to talk to you about Super Beets. Super Beets, we could all benefit from heart healthy energy. Yes, we can. Every single one of us. I can't even begin to tell you how much I love Super Beets Heart Chews. They're an easy and convenient way to support healthy blood pressure That is important to me. They're plant-based and stimulant-free, so you get a green boost without any jitters, guys. Paired with a healthy lifestyle, the antioxidants in Super Beets are clinically shown to be nearly 2 times more effective at promoting normal blood pressure than healthy lifestyle alone. I take them with me everywhere I go, whether I'm on vacation, whether I'm doing a story, whether I'm traveling all the way to the Antelope Valley, right, to cover stories like the marijuana grows, whether I'm interviewing investigative journalists like Steve Robinson. I am taking my Super Beets. Why? Because I want to be healthy and I want to feel good. Remember, they're a convenient way to support healthy blood pressure. Super Beet Heart Chews are plant-based and so easy to add to your routine. No pills to swallow. It tastes great. And they come in little foil. You can carry them in your pocket, carry them in your purse. Whatever you want to do, you can have them on you. They're trusted by collegiate athletes and pro sports teams. Support performance and endurance. Double your potential with Super Beets Heart Chews. Get a free 30-day supply of Super Beet Heart Chews and a free full-sized bag of turmeric chews valued at $25 by going to americalovesbeets.com. That is americalovesbeets.com. Get this exclusive offer at americalovesbeets.com. Happy to have with me Steve Robinson, who is editor-in-chief of the Maine Wire. And for all of you out there that are following his great work, you know that he has been breaking these major stories on China and illegal grows apparently in Maine. This is something that we here at the Sara Carter Show, we've been talking about these issues. I reported in Oklahoma, actually, with Governor Stitt on Sean Hannity, Steve, about a huge problem they were having in Oklahoma where the Chinese companies that were connected directly with the Chinese government were purchasing large swaths of land using middlemen. They were saying that that land was going to be used for marijuana grows, but then come to find out in Oklahoma, and I want to hear what you're finding out in Maine and Oklahoma, there were no water rights to any of this land for them to grow the marijuana. So nobody knew what was going on. It was like a big mystery. Tell us a little bit about your work, and thank you so much for being on the Sara Carter Show.
Well, thank you very much for having me. My interest in the story really started with Jenny Taylor from the Daily Caller, who published a leaked Department of Homeland Security memo that just said there are 270 to 300 illegal Chinese-owned marijuana sites. The memo said that they were connected with what they referred to as Asian transnational criminal organizations. And when I heard about that, I made some calls to some of my friends who are in the marijuana industry, the legal side of it, of course, here in Maine. And they said, oh, yeah, this is a big problem. This is definitely something worth looking into. So we went to work looking at real estate records, primarily in rural Maine. And we were able to find just hundreds and hundreds of these properties, some of them using just one bank in New York in order to secure financing for them. And then we went out and visited them to confirm that they were marijuana grows. And you know that they're illegal because most of them are happening in residential areas. And you can tell that they're growing marijuana because the smell is just overpowering in most cases. And there are also some telltale signs around the buildings that are pretty good hints as to what they're doing, specifically huge upgrades to the amount of power that they're consuming. Because they don't just need lights and water pumps. They also need actual air conditioners. We're in Maine, not typically known for needing a lot of air conditioning up here, but they have to keep the rooms where they're growing the marijuana at between 75 and 80 degrees. So the lights create heat. They have heat pumps to suck out the heat. So you'll see some of these houses in Maine that have just been really torn apart and turned into marijuana grows rather than single family homes. And every time we visited one of these places, they had the same telltale signs of having been turned into an illegal marijuana grow. And when you talk with law enforcement, whether it's a local police chief, a county sheriff, or even some state and federal officials, they say, yeah, this is happening. We know about the sites, and somebody's waiting for somebody else to do something. That's a big part of the story here, Sara, is that law enforcement knows about these sites at the federal, local, county level, yet they continue to operate with impunity.
Yeah, this is what blows my mind. Okay. So before COVID, I went with Congressman Mike Garcia because that is exactly what was happening in California. So in California, in the Antelope Valley in Lancaster, there were these massive marijuana grows. They know there were Chinese cartels and Chinese, I guess, criminal organizations involved in it. There were also Russians, Armenian. I mean, it was a whole slew, and of course, Mexican cartels. Now, in the Antelope Valley, all of this land was owned by residents. They had large swaths of land that they had purchased a long time ago for basically, minimal amounts of dollars that have grown obviously in value. But these marijuana grows were illegally siphoning water, even if they weren't on the private land. They were siphoning water from the private land to grow them. They were apparently, the Armenian cartels were using that money to fund wars overseas. They were just like funding, battles overseas. And God only knows what was happening with the Chinese cartels and their connections back to China, to their homeland and to their government. So this is what blew my mind, is exactly what you just said, Steve. And I am so thankful for your investigative work because it was so thorough. And I know Jenny, and of course, Jenny worked with me, and Jenny Tier did an awesome job of getting that memo out there and getting it public so that we knew exactly the extent of what was happening across the country. But your work was so thorough in exposing the fact, and this is where you and I, the mystery begins. This is where we're going to talk about the fact that our law enforcement apparatus was doing nothing. Like, what if you and I were growing like marijuana in our house? And this was happening, by the way, all over the Antelope Valley as well, in homes. There were homes where cartels were doing it inside the home. So they'd buy these like $300,000, $400,000 homes, maybe even $500,000 homes. And they were turning them into marijuana grows, like right in the middle of a neighborhood of regular folks. What do you think is going on, and what are you hearing?
Well, I think that the organizations who are doing this have a playbook that's pretty obvious at this point for anyone who's paid attention to the stories, whether it's Washington State, Oklahoma, California, or a very large one on a Navajo reservation in New Mexico that was recently broken up. They go to states where marijuana laws have been passed, whether it's recreational or medicinal. Here in Maine, we have recreational and medicinal, and that distinction will be important as we continue to talk about this. But they know that as soon as they legalize marijuana, there's a shift in how law enforcement and people think about it. It moves from an illegal drug to something more like craft beer. And so law enforcement looks at the way the voters or the lawmakers have crafted policy and says, okay, you guys don't want us to make this a priority. So in Maine now, our marijuana laws are so relaxed that somebody growing marijuana illegally, like these organizations are, it's kind of like operating an unlicensed dairy farm or, committing some other kind of business administration violation. So it's not really a priority for law enforcement. They're more interested in cracking down on fentanyl, which is a huge problem in Maine. Methamphetamine is a huge problem in Maine. And also there are other non-drug related offenses that local law enforcement are tasked with. So that, I think, is the innocent explanation as to why these organizations have been allowed to proliferate in states across America, including Maine. I also think that most of these properties are in a rural part of the state. They're not right in your face. They're buying up, pretty cheap homes and really keeping to themselves and trying to fly under the radar. So it wasn't really a problem that's right in people's faces. And it's all happening, mind you, during the pandemic when the state of Maine had some of the strictest lockdowns of any state. So people weren't really out and about. They were minding their own business. They were trying to survive. Law enforcement was more interested in enforcing Governor Mills' shutdown orders, frankly, than in focusing on foreign organized crime. So I think you had a perfect storm, whether it was our marijuana laws, COVID happening, the fact that this is happening in rural Maine. I think that all kind of came together to create this lethargy when it comes to society's law enforcement cracking down on these places.
Well,
and then the last thing I would say.
Oh, no, go ahead. Finish up.
Oh, Yeah, just the last thing I would say on that is it seems like a jurisdictional mess because, I went and talked with the Office of Cannabis Policy, which regulates marijuana in Maine. They told me when they learn about an illegal Chinese grow, they refer it to local law enforcement. Every law enforcement officer I talked with told me that when they get a tip about an illegal Chinese grow, they refer it to the Office of Cannabis Policy. So there's this perfect circle of buck passing going around, and no one's sure whose responsibility it is to actually crack down on these organizations. And the sheriffs seem to be just waiting for the FBI to roll up on this entire operation. And I know from my reporting that the FBI has been on to at least a few of these sites for 2 years.
So this is where my question is. And this is what I have a hard time with. We have Chinese triad, criminal organizations. We know that the Chinese government itself has been involved in sweeping up large swaths of land. They utilize drug cartels to move their fentanyl into our country. And I think we waited way too long to even address that issue. It's become such a crisis in America now that we're losing over 100,000 people. And I think that's on a low ball number every year to opioid and fentanyl killings and deaths. I don't want to say just overdoses because I believe people are actually killed by these pills and they don't know it. And it's, I've been and experienced that in our own family where we've had two of my children's friends actually lose their lives to fentanyl. So it's very difficult. This is my problem. And this was the same problem I had when I went to the sheriff in LA County and he was charged with it. And finally he busted it because we had so much attention. But he was saying, look, I can't get the county to move on it, to allow me the resources to do what I need to do to bust these guys. And I'm glad you're here and you're exposing it. Maybe they'll do it now. Do you think people are on pay? I mean, people are getting paid off in these counties. I mean, how do you let a foreign criminal, transnational criminal organization to run operations in your county and nobody cares? And everybody's like, oh, well, we legalized marijuana. Well, you didn't legalize Chinese triads. You might not be busting the kid who's 13, who's growing some marijuana in his bathtub or whatever. Right? Do you ever ask that question? Like, well, wait a minute.
I'll say that there's the lack of action on these places, especially for neighbors who have to have, just the smell of marijuana wafting over their property, even in towns that have voted against having any commercial marijuana grows in their towns.
Right.
The neighbors, that fosters a lot of cynicism, and that leads people to express to me their belief that there are law enforcement who are being bought off or that there's something untoward going on. I haven't found any hard proof of that myself. It would explain some of the things that are going on, but there's one place that Jenny and I visited just like a week ago. There's a daycare. We're standing in the doorway of the daycare, talking with the woman who runs it, and you can just smell the marijuana from the illegal grow across the street drifting across. And it's a residential neighborhood. It's illegal. It's a commercial scale grow. And once a month, a van with Massachusetts license plates shows up, and two young guys hop out, make a load, and drive away. So it's very obvious what's happening there if you understand some of the details of how marijuana is grown. But if you're in that situation, running that daycare, and your customers are coming to pick up their kids and smelling like there's 10 dead skunks in the front yard. Yeah, right. You might be a little suspicious about the police. You've called the police a dozen times and they don't seem to want to enforce the laws. So yeah, you might grow a little cynical and think that maybe law enforcement are being paid off.
Folks, I talked to you about HelloFresh. How much do I love it? I love it. I get it every week. I get 3 meals every single week from HelloFresh because it is so easy and convenient for me and my family. I'm able to make the food here at home, but I don't have to go through all the hassle of trying to figure out what those 3 meals that week are going to be. Like, it's creative. It allows me to make things out of my comfort zone. And food that my family actually really, really loves. HelloFresh, you get farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. They even have someone, when they drop it off, they take a picture of it, they send it to your text messages. You know that your HelloFresh is there at the door and they keep it fresh. packed in ice so everything stays cool and frozen just the way you need it. And holidays are right around the corner, folks. And HelloFresh can help take that stress out of dinner by delivering everything you need to cook up tasty meals right to your door, saving you tons of time and money. Just like always, HelloFresh's ingredients travel from the farm to your door so that you know they're fresh, and everything arrives pre-portioned so you can get right to cooking quickly. Like I said, my family loves it. My daughter loves going through the recipes with me. She's 11 years old and she loves to cook. And this makes it so easy and convenient for us to do this at home. Go to HelloFresh.com/Sara Carter Free and use code Sara Carter Free for free breakfast for life. What? One breakfast item per box while subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life at HelloFresh.com/Sara Carter Free with code Sara Carter Free. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. And I'm glad we're touching on all of these little connect the dots, right, with you, because I think you're doing such a thorough job, and Jenny too, in doing this. But this is where accountability comes into play. How do you have a daycare with children in a daycare and a drug operation happening right across the way, not legal? Because I don't have any problem if it's legalized and it's monitored. And I mean, I may have my own issues of how I feel about that. But I do believe that cannabis for medicinal purposes and medical reasons is a fantastic way of handling, especially for people with cancer and other illnesses, you know, of handling the illness and the side effects of the medication and those illnesses. So I'm not saying we've got to make it illegal. What I am saying is we have transnational criminal organizations. Some of them I would consider terrorist organizations like the cartels. We have China using these cartels as proxies. So why wouldn't China use the triads as proxies? And who is the middleman in some of these land purchases? I mean, have you seen any evidence of that? Like middlemen, I mean, Oklahoma had issues. They were like, oh, wait a minute. I talked to Governor Stitt and he was like, you know what happened? We found out that there were Americans that were posing as the land buyers for the Chinese companies and even for homes. What's going on here?
Yeah,
did you see any of that?
Well, I know also in Oklahoma, some of these operations were actually getting their medical licenses. We've seen no evidence whatsoever in Maine that they're trying to follow any kind of marijuana law here.
Wow.
But I know that in Oklahoma, there's like 7,000 medical caregivers, and something like 4,000 or 5,000 of them are, suspicious in the eyes of the government because they're now on to what's happening. But the weird thing about this was most of these properties are purchased under the names of operators or members of the criminal organization.
So they're just coming in and buying the land. They're like, hey, I got cash. Here you go.
And so when I first saw that, I said, wow, this is really unusual because it stands out when you're looking at when you're looking at 10 years of property records, and almost every 99.9% of those properties have been French Canadians or, Scotsmen or Irish. And then you see Chinese surnames pop up and they're all people from Quincy and Brooklyn. It was kind of unusual to me. And I've thought to myself, why wouldn't they just form an LLC? But there are some of these operations that are operating under LLCs as the property owners. But the difference was that the electrical companies in the state of Maine made a change at some point because they were being left hanging with power bills. Once a site was abandoned for whatever reason, they'd be left with a $5,000 unpaid power bill. So they were.
Wait, that's so funny. That's really great. So so the state of Maine is left with this giant power bill. That's when they care. Like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, that was California. It was like, there were nice, families that I'd meet, and they'd be like, this was our property. And then we were left with this bill for like, $8,000 in water in the last 3 months or something. And, Antelope Valley, which is desert. And it's like, nobody cared about them. But if it would have been left up to the state, then maybe California would have taken some action. So that's what you're seeing.
I've seen some cases where one individual who's operating the site leaves behind a lien for the next person whose name it's transferred into. So they're also passing the buck onto each other in some cases. But
Wow.
There are some LLCs operating these sites, and those tend to be ones that are in what are legitimately commercial facilities. So they're still illegal grows, not registered with the state, but they've rented a 10,000 square foot warehouse. There was one in Carmel, Maine that was busted, and that had, I think, close to 4,000 plants, live plants. And there were 4 Chinese nationals who were arrested, but the owner was not one of them. The owner of the property wasn't one of them, and apparently is not facing any charges, has basically said, oh, I didn't know what was happening there. So that's kind of the line that you get when these facilities are busted.
How can you plead ignorance on that? And by the way, did you find out if the Chinese guys that were operating this did they cross the border? Did they ask for asylum? What was going on? Or were they here? Were they just American Chinese working with Chinese triads in China? What do we know?
That hasn't come out in court filings, but Maine is also a sanctuary state. So law enforcement aren't actually allowed to ask questions about immigration. What they can really do is if they suspect.
I just got to take a breath here again, because it just blows my mind. So they're not even allowed to ask questions. So basically you can have like let's say it again, a transnational criminal organization operating through various nations, but in the United States, owning land, growing marijuana, and no one cares. And even the daycare across the street is like, well, our kids are getting high, but who cares? Like, I don't even understand. Okay, go ahead, Steve. We're just going to keep going.
Yeah. I mean, I think kind of what we're circling around here is the harm that this operation is doing to the state of Maine, and similar operations are doing also harm to the residents of those states.
How long has this been going on? How long? How long? Do you know?
The buying really started in late 2019 because, again, they have a playbook that they run, and they knew that Maine was going to. So Maine voted at a ballot referendum to legalize recreational adult use marijuana, but the state didn't get its act together with the regulatory system until 2020. So 2020 is when the first fully recreational adult use marijuana, where you could do commercial scale grows in Maine. So from 2019, it really picked up in 2020. And then over the next 3 years, buying really accelerated. And it's still happening. I mean, I found some deeds and mortgage documents as recently as September that show that the properties are being purchased by, individuals who have all the hallmarks of being one of these operations. And
right.
So I think that they have no reason really to shut down. The Homeland Security memo says there are between 270 and 300 of these sites operating in Maine. I think that's a low end estimate. But as far as I can tell, there's only 2 that have been busted by law enforcement. There's the one in Carmel that I just told you about. And then there was one in Dexter, which is actually my hometown, where the local police pulled a vehicle over as it was leaving, and they grew suspicious because the individual driving the van couldn't speak English and was shaking. He was so scared. So they opened up the van to do a search, and they didn't find any pot. But when they brought a dog in, they found 30 pounds of pot concealed under various compartments in the van. And that they got a warrant. They busted the house. There was like 800 or 900 plants there. And Jenny and I actually went inside that house because it's been purchased by a lovely family from Cape Cod who has 4 kids. They didn't know what they were getting themselves into, but it was a really eye-opening look at the kind of structural modifications that have been made to one of these buildings. Like they just sawed holes like this big around in all of the floors so that they could install venting. And I don't know if you're familiar with these vacuum systems, but they were popular in the 70s, the internal house vacuum systems. So this house had one of those, and they used it for some aspect of the marijuana processing. So the entire tube is lined with, sticky, icky marijuana resin. And on hot days, that house is going to smell like pot forever. They're basically going to have to rip out the vacuum system if they want to ever have the house not smell like pot. And so this is happening over and over and over again in Maine, and the structural differences vary from place to place, but the houses are being taken from houses for middle-class people or elderly people and being transformed into houses for criminal organizations to manufacture drugs. And this is all happening at a time when Maine has a generational shortage of housing. It's the number one issue that lawmakers want to talk about. It's a huge issue in our biggest cities. There are not houses for people who want to live in Maine and play by the rules, but there are upward, 300 or more properties that are being controlled by people who are engaged in this very antisocial behavior.
Let me ask
one thing
you this.
we don't see.
Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say one thing you don't see at any of these places. You never see kids and you never see families. Like on all of these mortgage records, you don't see couples who are purchasing homes. You see single individuals, and there are never any kids, and they rarely meet their neighbors. So it's whether it's they're not paying taxes, they're destroying these houses. Homeland Security says that they're using the proceeds of the marijuana sales to do narcotics trafficking and human trafficking. There are just so many different ways where this is just profoundly antisocial and not in America's interest to allow it to continue to happen. But for some reason, it's difficult for people to wrap their minds around until you thoroughly understand the problem.
Well, I want to thank you, Steve, for coming on the Sara Carter Show today. What incredible work you're doing. Folks, this is what I want to bring to you. We're straight from the horse's mouth, right? First-hand knowledge of what is happening in our country so that you have the tools not only to recognize that if it's happening in your community, but guess what? You'll have the tools to fight back and protect your family and protect your nation. This is why great journalism must and always should be protected. This is why the First Amendment is so important because, folks, this is it. If we don't protect this country, where else do we go? And right now, I want you to go to themainewire.com. That's themainewire.com. Support Steve Robinson. Support the work that he's doing. Read his stories and come back tomorrow for part 2. I promise you, you do not want to miss it. Please make sure to subscribe to the Sara Carter Show here on your favorite podcast app. It really does help. Follow me on Truth at Sara Carter Official, on X at Sara Carter DC, and on Instagram at SCarterDC. God bless you. God bless our great nation. God protect us from our adversaries. And God bless the great state of Texas. Happy to be home.